And I detail in my book as well how much less information is now flowing. The Privy Council Office, which I really respect the Canadian Civil Service. At its height, when you had a really professional group of people who gave dispassionate advice, who were respected for knowing their stuff, whether it was foreign affairs, and John and I both agree that the role of Canadian foreign service and diplomacy has really declined. There's not the emphasis on our international agenda that there once was. At a time that we desperately need to focus internationally, we are increasingly controlled by a domestic agenda, which is most clearly epitomized by Stephen Harper choosing to skip the United Nations discussions for leaders of governments about nuclear disarmament and the climate crisis in order to stage a photo op at Tim Hortons in Canada. I mean, if that is not the epitome, the moment that states Canada no longer cares about the rest of the world, but that targeted, focused message to a base in domestic political terms will outrank the UN anytime you turn around. But we did have that really professional cadre of civil servants who did a marvelous job regardless of who was the political power, because you knew that politicians and prime ministers would come and go, but if you were in the civil service, for good or for ill, you were there to do the best work you could on behalf of the people of Canada. So not to idealize it too much, but there's no question that that political civil service has now, non-political civil service is either ignored by the current government or so deeply politicized that even the Privy Council office is no longer really separate from the political agenda of the PMO. And that's also dangerous. I've never seen the civil service in this country as demoralized and dispirited as they are today. And you have to know that when a Minister of Natural Resources, and I'm sure it was the Prime Minister's idea, decides on 11 o'clock on a Friday night to fire the President of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission for following the letter of the law and doing her job, that has, as Sheila Fraser said, as Attorney General, as our Auditor General, that has a real chilling effect on everyone involved in regulating for health and safety. If you know you're fired for protecting health and safety and making a government look bad, that has a very profound and negative effect on the job the civil servants are doing. And of course, it would scare off anyone from regulating in a way that you might think would cross the interests of your political bosses. So my thesis in my book, that kind of covers the resonance between the two of us, this is not a book about the Green Party, it's about a crisis in democracy. I think that the evidence for a crisis in Canadian democracy is made evident just by the declining levels of voter turnout. Only roughly 58% of Canadians voted in our last federal election. It's not just the young people who are not voting. It's a lot of people my age. I meet on the doorsteps and they say, well, I last voted in 1997 or I last voted in 1993. And I hear far too often people say, I just figured I wanted to stop encouraging them. Think, no, wait a minute. Voting is not a way of, it's not a reality TV show where when you vote, you show you actually like someone on stage. This is, in fact, democracy, and we have the ability and the power to vote for a representative who will represent our views. And voting is the way we control the decision makers in government. It's not a way of sending them a signal that we're happy with the job they're doing. In fact, by not voting, you're giving a pat on the back to whatever politician you find most despicable. Because the trend in reducing voter turnout is also a manipulated trend where at least the current government in power in the last election used a number of things as tactics to expand the number of MPs who were elected as Conservatives while deliberately reducing voter turnout. So we can talk about this as well. We need to encourage people to vote. I know Fair Vote Canada was here handing you all material as you came in the door. One of the things that I think would be the single most salutary change to get Canadians voting again, to ensure representative democracy, and to reduce the excessive power of organized political parties whose partisanship and an agenda at all times focused on an election instead of on governing is actually poisoning the functioning of government, because the House of Commons is increasingly a war ground for an election campaign that isn't on right now. And that has to end. To do that, I think we do make the single biggest step in the right direction would be to have proportional representation. There's a lot more I'd like to say, but I think that's my time by way of intro, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.